How you are doing?
If you just laughed, smiled, or felt a wave of nostalgia hit you, congratulations. You lived through the golden age of sitcoms. The 90s weren't just another decade of television, they were the decade where sitcoms ruled. Thursday nights weren't about scrolling your phone or catching up on streaming. They were about being in front of the television at 8 p.m. sharp, ready to laugh with the characters who felt like family. Some gave us unforgettable catchphrases, others reinvented what a sitcom could even be, and a few, well, they managed to do both, defining not just the 90s, but comedy itself for years to come. So today, we're counting down the 10 sitcoms that didn't just make us laugh, they defined an era. And where better to begin than with 6 friends, 1 couch, and a fountain that made television history. When Friends premiered, nobody could have predicted just how big it would become. On paper, it was simple. 6 young adults living in New York, navigating love, work, and friendship. But what made it explode was the chemistry. Ross, Rachel, Monica, Chandler, Joey, and Phoebe weren't just characters, they felt like actual friends you checked in on every week. The show turned catchphrases into cultural events. Joey's "how you doing" wasn't just a line, it was basically an entire flirting strategy for a generation. And let's not forget the romances. Ross and Rachel's will they, won they saga became one of TV's most iconic storylines, sparking debates that still pop up on social media today. Behind the laughs, Friends was also a juggernaut for NBC. It anchored the network's legendary must-see television lineup, kept audiences hooked for 10 seasons, and its finale drew over 50 million viewers, a number modern television can only dream about. Even now, decades later, Friends hasn't just aged into comfort television. It's a cultural export. From memes to merch to Gen Z discovering it on streaming, the show continues to make new fans. Simply put, Friends wasn't just the story of 6 pals in New York, it was the sitcom that made the whole world want to grab coffee at Central Park. But while Friends gave us warmth, romance, and iconic catchphrases, another 90s sitcom went in the complete opposite direction. It proudly called itself a show about nothing. When Seinfeld hit its stride in the 90s, it redefined the sitcom. Instead of big dramatic storylines, it mined comedy from the mundane, waiting for a table at a restaurant, losing your car in a parking garage, even the etiquette of double dipping a chip. Jerry, George, Elaine, and Kramer weren't designed to be lovable. They were neurotic, selfish, and often petty. And that's exactly why people connected with them. And while Friends thrived on heart, Seinfeld thrived on irony. Its rule of no hugging, no learning made it the anti-sitcom, and audiences couldn't get enough. By its finale, 76 million people tuned in one of the most watched episodes in television history. It may have been a show about nothing, but in the 90s, nothing was bigger. And if Seinfeld thrived by showing us the comedy and everyday pettiness, the next sitcom showed us what happened when everyday life was flipped upside down, literally. When a West Philadelphia teen got into one little fight and his mom got scared, television history was made. The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air wasn't just a sitcom, it was a cultural phenomenon. Will Smith brought his natural charisma and comedic timing to a role that felt tailor-made for him. The fish out of water premise, a street-smart kid moving in with his wealthy relatives, gave the show endless opportunities for comedy. But what kept audiences hooked was its heart. Episodes tackled racism, class, family, and belonging, all while still delivering huge laughs. Who can forget the emotional gut punch of Will's "How come he don't want me, man?" scene with Uncle Phil?
How come he don't want me, man?
At the same time, it gave us one of the most beloved sitcom characters ever in Uncle Phil's stern but loving, Tough but fair, a true television dad. Where Seinfeld rejected hugs and lessons, Fresh Prince embraced them while still making us laugh until our sides hurt. But if Will Smith's sitcom proved that heart and humor could coexist, our next series showed that smart, witty banter could turn a spin-off into a critical darling. Spin-offs rarely surpass the shows they come from, but Frasier was the exception. Emerging from Cheers, it followed Dr. Frasier Crane back to Seattle, where he juggled his career as a radio psychiatrist with his eccentric family. What made Frasier stand out was its sophistication. Its humor leaned into wordplay, farce, and highbrow references, but it never felt inaccessible. Kelsey Grammer and David Hyde Pierce as Frasier and Niles had some of the sharpest comedic timing of the decade, and the dynamic with their down-to-earth father, Martin, created a perfect comedic clash. Frasier proved that sitcoms didn't need to chase mass slapstick to succeed. They could be witty, layered, and still hilarious. And while Frasier found humor in the refined and intellectual, another 90s juggernaut went in the opposite direction, celebrating power tools, grunts, and suburban dad energy. Home Improvement captured the 90s suburban family experience like few shows could. Tim Allen's Tim the Toolman Taylor was a lovable goof, constantly making mistakes both on his show within a show, Tool Time, and at home with his wife and 3 sons. The comedy was broad but relatable, and the mix of slapstick with genuine family lessons made it a staple of ABC's lineup. Tim's neighbor Wilson, whose face we never fully saw, became one of TV's quirkiest running gags. Where Frasier was witty and refined, Home Improvement was blue-collar and down-to-earth, and it worked. At its peak, it was one of the highest-rated shows in America. But while Home Improvement leaned on family values and wholesome lessons, our next sitcom thrived on bickering, in-laws, and the chaos of everyday married life. Ray Romano turned his stand-up act into one of the most relatable sitcoms of the decade. Everybody Loves Raymond followed Ray Barone, his wife Deborah, their kids, and most importantly his overbearing parents and brother who lived right across the street. The brilliance of the show wasn't in big plot twists, but in the small, universal annoyances of family life. From Ray's laziness to Marie's meddling to Robert's constant jealousy, it felt authentic, and that authenticity kept audiences hooked for 9 seasons. It showed that sitcoms didn't always need flashy premises. Sometimes everyday family dysfunction was more than enough. But if Raymond reflected the everyday, our next sitcom reflected a working-class family who pushed boundaries and stirred controversy, both on-screen and off. Though it began in the late 80s, Roseanne became one of the defining sitcoms of the 90s. It portrayed the Connors, a blue-collar family dealing with financial struggles, teenage rebellion, and everyday chaos. Roseanne Barr's biting humor and John Goodman's grounded performance gave the show a balance of edge and warmth. Unlike many sitcoms of its era, it wasn't about aspirational lifestyles. It was about survival, relatability, and a family that felt real. Its impact was undeniable, though its later years were plagued with controversy. Still, for much of the 90s, Roseanne gave a voice to working-class America. But if Roseanne showed us the messy realities of family, our next sitcom gleefully exaggerated dysfunction into outrageous comedy. Before the Bundys, sitcom families were mostly wholesome. Then came Al, Peggy, Kelly, and Bud, the anti-sitcom family. Was crass, cynical, and often outrageous, and audiences loved it. Ed O'Neill's portrayal of Al Bundy, the miserable shoe salesman, became iconic, while Katie Saigel's Peggy flipped the traditional housewife role on its head. It may not have been family-friendly in the traditional sense, but its willingness to skewer the perfect sitcom family made it groundbreaking. Still, if Married with Children thrived on cynicism, the next sitcom thrived on pure absurdity with aliens, disguises, and a cast of Earth's most confused landlords. Third Rock from the Sun took the fish out of water sitcom to hilarious extremes. A group of aliens, disguised as a human family, came to Earth to study humanity with disastrous and hilarious results. Lithgow's over-the-top performance as Dick Solomon, paired with a young Joseph Gordon-Levitt as Tommy, made the show a masterclass in physical and situational comedy. It was weird, wacky, and unlike anything else on television, a reminder that the 92nd weren't afraid to get experimental with sitcoms. And speaking of experiments, our final sitcom blended nostalgia for the past with sharp writing, creating a 90s staple that looked back on the 70s. Though it premiered at the tail end of the decade, that 70s show quickly cemented itself as a 90s sitcom classic. Set in Wisconsin during the 1970s, it followed Eric, Donna, Kelso, Jackie, Hyde, and Fez as they navigated teenage life, love, and rebellion. The retro setting gave it a fresh twist, while the cast, many of whom became stars, later brought authenticity and charm. Red Foreman's gruff one-liners, the running circle gags, and the mix of nostalgia and teen comedy made it a standout. It may have looked back 2 decades, but in the 90s, that 70s show perfectly captured the spirit of sitcom storytelling. The 90s were a golden age for sitcoms. Whether it was the heartfelt bonds of Friends, the biting irony of Seinfeld, or the wild absurdity of Third Rock, these shows didn't just entertain us, they defined the decade. Even now, decades later, they live on through reruns, streaming, and memes, proving that good comedy never goes out of style. Because in the end, whether you were Team Ross and Rachel, Team Elaine and Kramer, or just Team Bundy, the sitcoms of the 90s weren't just television, they were part of our lives.